Thank you for joining us on this podcast series. It is sponsored from a grant from the Health Services, Dorchester County, to work with youth to understand vaping use and reasons maybe why, and also to help prevent teens with to take on that habit. And so I was interested in inviting you to discuss strategies and other aspects about vaping that maybe you've seen in your practice, and then also just to talk about maybe some advice that teens can use instead of, if vaping is used to kind of relieve some anxiety, maybe, there's some other strategies that they could think about. Yeah, so I thought maybe first if you can introduce yourself and your organization, your work on the Eastern Shore.
Sure. So my name is Beth Anne Langrell, and I'm the CEO of For All Seasons, and we are the region's behavioral health and only rape crisis center serving the 5 counties of the Midshore. We are a nonprofit agency that serves both our English and Spanish speaking communities across the shore without one's regard to ability to pay. So somebody could have insurance, they might not have insurance, they may not be able to afford a copay, and we are able to serve folks regardless of that ability to pay. Mm-hmm. We have 7 offices across the Midshore, stretching all the way from Cambridge, Tillman Island, Denton, Queenstown, and up into Chestertown, as well as 2 offices in Easton. And so we cover quite a large area and see just under 3,000 clients a year. And as I said, we are the only rape crisis center. So we also serve sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, and sexual violence victims throughout the 5 counties of the Midshore as well.
Great. Do you serve a lot of teen population? Is that a group that you're familiar with or work with?
Yeah, absolutely. We serve folks from what I call womb to tomb. So it's from pregnant moms all the way up to our oldest client is over the age of 90. And we have clinicians that work right in our schools. So we serve all of the county school systems as well, whether we are in the schools or providing trainings for the schools, the teachers, administrators, and the students. And I would say that our, adolescent population and our children population is one that is a highly served population throughout the folks that we work with.
So maybe just to set a stage in the sense of what kind of, as a age group, do you find that there are certain specific ways of handling stress or, certain, not necessarily propensity, but would you say being involved in vaping is kind of aligns itself specifically with teen age?
I think we all, if you look across the spectrum of stress, I think all of our children are in a stressful time, especially as we are continuing to come out from the shutdown with COVID and all that's happened over the last couple of years. I think we certainly see kids who are struggling differently. People who used to feel like, even adults, when we're talking about our kid population, because we need to make sure that we as adults are able to fill our buckets with tools as well to be able to work with our kids. And certainly our middle school and high school population, they've missed essentially a full year of being in person with one another. And so we are seeing absolutely a higher level of stress and anxiety that presents itself in our middle schools and our high schools. We see a different level of social interaction and kids having to relearn how to be off screen. And certainly with social media and some of the things that we have, kids take different opportunities to maybe work through the stress that they're feeling. And so certainly vaping is one of the things that is now available to students. And I would certainly say that our high school students, when you and I were growing up, it was don't smoke. And now the cessation classes have turned to don't vape. And so I certainly think that we're seeing a population of kids and adults that are turning to the vaping versus the old-fashioned light a cigarette in a different way.
Has it come up in therapy, people talking about, of course, your patient privacy, but just the concept of e-cigarettes and the use of them or the social pressures around them? Does the topic come up?
Yeah, I certainly think that we have kids, no different than we see substance abuse. Vaping is just another form. It's a coping mechanism that our kids are seeing. And so certainly it's a topic that comes to light within the services that we provide. We are able to help children with vaping more than we have before because it's new and it's something that's happening and continuing to grow. You see vape shops popping up now, like you used to see a liquor store come about. And so certainly we are seeing that across the board. And, I even know from my own son who's in middle school, when they went through their health class this year, vaping was a huge part of the health class program. It's something that's really talked about.
Yeah, I know the prevalence of the stores is definitely new.
It's definitely a way that I feel like popular culture is normalizing vaping a little bit differently. And we as individuals growing up heard about the dangers of tobacco. Now I feel like the conversation has turned a little bit more to the dangers of vaping and not understanding the chemicals that are going into your body. And there's sort of that yin and yang conversation of, well, I'm not smoking, but then there's the other side of it where, correct, you're not smoking, there's not tobacco being sucked into your lungs, but who knows the chemicals that are being used to create the vape apparatus that are going into your system. And so I think that's where a lot of the focus comes in the education piece.
Yeah, we did have a presentation like the first time we were together with these teens, and we had a presentation from the health department, and the information about the amount of nicotine in these different devices is huge. It's exponential compared to cigarettes.
Right. And I think that's a component that's a really important point to make, that the kids aren't necessarily seeing it that way. It looks like a USB. And even, I'll sit at baseball games with my kids and I'll watch parents vape. It it is amazing how many more times I'm watching individuals take hits on the vape than I would have seen somebody smoke cigarettes. Typically you would see somebody smoke one or two cigarettes during a game, but cartridges are emptied during a baseball game now. It seems like it's just an easier thing. And, certainly when you ask about the stress and anxiety, it is going to lessen people's stress. It is going to lessen people's anxiety. So the impact of that one breath in, if that's something that is bringing an immediate sensation of, okay, now I can relax, there is an easier mechanism to be able to not have to light a cigarette, not have to leave your seat to be able to do the vaping. There's so many things that we hear about now, like there's vaping in the bathrooms. Well, when we were growing up, you smelled smoke. You don't necessarily smell the vapes. And so there's a lot that comes with the vaping that makes it easier for people to continue to go back to it.
So you brought up before about kind of stress relief, that possibly
Mhm.
these are, used as reliefs, but it was interesting in the presentation that we got that actually it increases anxiety because of maybe the reaction with the chemicals, or nicotine makes you
Mhm.
more jittery. So it's interesting I'm interested in trying to combat that. Maybe it might be a myth that it's, lowers your stress. So I guess my question is more, what other habits or behaviors would you suggest specifically teens could think about instead of vaping?
Sure. I just gave a 2-day presentation to all of the Kent County high schools up in Chestertown, and it was all on test anxiety. And one of the things we talked about is that if we don't fill our young people with tools in their toolbox, that's where vaping comes in. So it doesn't surprise me at all to know that vaping is going to increase anxiety because of the chemicals, but sort of that the mentality that I need this to feel less stressed is something that really works against a child's mind. And so what I would say is, there's simple things like taking a deep breath. And that sounds just so silly. And some of the students would say, you think seriously taking a deep breath makes a difference? It really does. Your breath is the one thing that you can count on. And so if we are starting to feel that heartbeat go up, some students identify that when they're stressed, they have like a pit in their stomach, or they start to feel their body gets a little bit warmer than normal, maybe they start to sweat. The ability to take some deep breaths in and then take deep breaths out is something that can be super helpful for kids. Also, being able to take a simple drink of water. Our brains, when they are focused in on stress or anxiety, they need a distraction. So when we are distracted as adults, in the middle of a presentation, or somebody bursts in the room, your brain gets a break from whatever's happening, and that burst of energy gives your brain a chance to then have to reset. Simple tasks of taking a sip of water out of a water bottle when someone is stressed is just a nice way to give yourself the ability to sort of take that step back, give your brain a little bit of opportunity to reset. I think the other thing that's really important when we talk about students and stress is that it's okay for our students to know that it's okay to be stressed. We live right now in a society where social media and the ability for everything to happen yesterday, there's not the patience that we had to grow up with. Things happen immediately. And so being able to help students work through the conversation of, it's okay that you're feeling stress and anxiety. Let's have a conversation about it. As humans, we're connected. We are hardwired for connection and being seen, heard, and valued. As Brene Brown would say, I do a lot of work with the research that she's put out. Sometimes just saying to a student, you seem stressed, or I'm getting the sense that something's going on. Do you need help? Do you want to talk about it? And I think, the other piece that's really important to put in a kid's bucket of stress relief and stress tools is, it's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to not do it right all the time. And we have such pressures on our students now, whether it be sports or music. Even when I am at my own kids' activities, most children are feeling the pressure like they're going into the MLB or the National Soccer League or the NFL. We need to be able to, as parents, as caregivers, as teachers, as administrators, and community members who work with kids, recognize that they're kids and that we have to not put so much pressure on the students. Yes, we want them to do well. Yes, it's okay to push them. But if it pushes kids to a point where their anxiety takes over before the skills and tools we're trying to teach them, if it's a sport, the information we're trying to teach them, if it is a class, then we have to check ourselves and pay attention to how we're presenting to students.
And those are really good points about all the pressure that society or these different like sports industrial complexes that we've created that's been
Yeah.
have really
It really is. It's gone from, let's just go out and have a good time on a field, to being a situation where everything is so pressure filled. And, sometimes that pressure comes from us as adults because we are ourselves are anxious about our child not performing well. And so we have to sort of do an inventory of our own bodies, and knowing that if our child is feeling pressure and stress or anxiousness, there's also that piece that it might be coming from us. Our child might be fine. We ourselves may be in a state of anxiousness or worried that our child is not going to do well, or they're not going to be the most popular kid, or, any number of things that might be causing us stress. Our children, our students that we work with, they pick up on that. And so it's so important that we are doing our own inventory of ourselves. And if we need to take a step back and take a time out, I'm a firm believer that kids can put parents in timeout, no different than parents can put children in timeout. And sometimes we need to put ourselves in our own timeout to say, whose anxiety is this? Whose stress is this? And if it's yours as a parent or as a coach or as a teacher, an administrator, a community member, a pastor, then we have to figure out our stuff and not put it on the child to help figure out.
I like that question, like whose stress is this? Because that gives a little bit more ownership to the community around a teen. Like a teen is not growing up in a vacuum.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we're not always going to get it right as parents or caregivers and teachers and every facet of adults, we're going to get it wrong sometimes. But I think, being able to figure out, being, I say to lots of folks that I work with, if you're having a bad day and your bad day lands on your child or lands on the child that you're working with, why? You have to be able to take that step back and say, like, why is this child getting the brunt of me? And is it that you haven't given yourself the ability to take a step back and say, I need to get myself together before I address this conversation? Because sometimes what happens is that we aren't ready to engage with someone else, whether it be another parent, whether it be a child. And so if we're not ready, that's where that body inventory becomes really important, so that we can say, let's get ourselves together before we start to address what could potentially become an anxiety or stressful provoking conversation. One of the things that is an important component for our kids, and I believe that this goes into any conversation, whether we're talking about vaping or smoking or any sort of quick fix that kids reach for right now, because that is what we see, is that a lot of our students don't have the tools to work it through, or that staying power that we had to gain. And that's our job to put with them. But part of what I think is really important when we're thinking in that lens is, what's the impact that I'm having on the people around me? And sometimes just the awareness of, how am I showing up as a parent today? How am I showing up as a caregiver? My students, my children, whoever we are around, our kids need to see us showing up as whole people, which doesn't mean we have to be perfect. It doesn't mean that students need to experience robotic teachers and community members. But if our behavior can model these different skills and tools and help to really grow kids, then perhaps the need to fit in with the vaping or reach for something like an alcoholic beverage, or move in a direction where they're hanging out with people that are starting to say, hey, it's fine, it makes you feel better. We have to be able to help our kids feel better naturally. And part of that comes in building skills and tools.
We haven't really touched on the pressures of groups of friends. I guess we refer to as peer pressure, but I don't know, any kind of specific observations or discussions about kind of you're talking about the impact of family or teachers or guiders, but what about how to manage peer pressure?
Yeah. Peer pressure is so hard because it's something that we all deal with. It's not just a kid thing, it's an adult thing too, right? Like, we all have situations where it's that need to sort of want to fit in and feel like you're a part of something. And I think that part of the really big part of peer pressure goes back to an openness and conversations and helping our students navigate. Do you want to lead or do you want to follow? And if you're following, what kind of environment do we want our kids experiencing? And peer pressure can be really hard. And it's important to know and lean into the fact that our parents are the experts with their children, or we can help parents become the expert if they're not yet. And I say that because, you have to be able to identify, is your child someone who is going to want to work really hard to fit in? Or is your child the kind of kid who is not really going to pay attention to the peer pressure? And if you identify that you are observing your child in friend groups and in social situations, being someone who understands right from wrong and knows the rules and the way that things are supposed to work, but you're watching kids be able to say, like, hey, do this, and comments like, well, I thought they wouldn't like me if I didn't. Those are the moments where we need to start to have conversations with our children and help them set some boundaries for themselves, help them understand their self-worth, help them understand the value in friendships that come from the genuineness of connection, and not the I hope you like me so type of situations. And I think it's really important when we're checking in with our kids to use those open-ended questions, not how was school today, but tell me a little, tell me the three best things about school today. And who did you hang out with today? And just sort of be checking in on those friend groups early on. And if there are situations where a child is coming and saying, like, well, everybody else was doing it, you know, the age old reaction that most parents have is, well, if somebody was going to go and stand in front of a car, would you do that too? We have to dig a little bit deeper with our kids now. And we have to be able to say, so what is it about this group that makes you feel like you're included if you do this? And what would happen if you didn't? And sort of helping kids see the other side of what would be A, the consequence if you start to get involved with these things, and B, helping students to see that what they may perceive as the end of the world because they won't be accepted may not be the end of the world when they start to peel it back a little bit.
That's a really interesting approach. There was an aspect of that, like if it wasn't like that, could they imagine it different?
Right. Yeah. Because sometimes they can't see beyond what's right in front of them. We have to remember that when our young people are still even all the way through high school, their brains are still developing. And so these little minds are still really learning the ropes. And, I was talking to someone earlier this week with the school shootings that have taken place in Texas and talking about how our little people are processing this when they're hearing it. And, I can say as a woman who has gone through college and is 25 years into my career, I'm processing stuff much different than I would have if I was 16 now. And so we have to remember that their brains are still really formulating pieces of what connects them, the right from wrong. And at times children are going to need to make mistakes on their own. We can guide, we can set those boundaries, we can sort of give them the guardrails that we see on a bridge, like I don't want to drive across the bridge if there's not guardrails. So making sure that our kids have those guardrails to help them stay safe and set some good boundaries.
Another part of my question is, when you define the we, like you just use we, like we need to help them, who, for students or teens, who can be their we?
Everybody can be their we. One of the things that I really firmly believe in is that it does take a village. And so trust is built in small moments. And so we need to recognize as adults that every interaction with a young child, whether we are in a grocery store, whether we are teaching them in a classroom, whether we're a parent on the sidelines, we that we is any individual who has an interaction with a child, because that child is learning from each time. If a child sees somebody treating their own child like they would not want to be treated, that's a learning moment. And how we then process that with our child, if someone is seeing someone be kind, if our children are experiencing the kindness of how are you doing and checking in, the kindness of, hey, you did a really great job on the field, versus, you were horrible in that game. Paying attention to how we are cultivating our children and how we are speaking with them. Language is so important, and it can be an opening for children or it can be a complete barrier. If somebody approaches a child and has nothing but negative things to say about them, the possibility that that child is going to go back when there's something that's wrong, or when they're hurting, or if there's someone in trouble, to a person who does nothing but cut a child down, is pretty slim. But if we can present ourselves as an open and welcoming and non-judgmental person within the community, I mean, don't get me wrong, we all judge. We have to own that. Like that's part of human nature. And whether, I don't know anybody who can honestly say, oh, I never judge anyone. We all do it, but we have to move ourselves away from judgment and be able to say to a child, you gave your best effort out there. Because for kids, the growth edge is skills and tools and learning. They're not going to get it right all the time. We as adults don't get it right all the time. But I think when there are small moments of interaction, whether you're in a grocery store, whether you're in a school, on a sports team, whether you're in the community, moments matter to kids. And those small moments, you might be the one adult in that child's day who cared enough to say, are you doing okay? or who cared enough to smile. Those are the moments where we start to really help to build up children in different ways. And if someone is that ball of stress and that ball of anxiety, maybe, just maybe, that one interaction they have with you gives them the chance to take a breath a little bit differently.
What are the different roles maybe in a school that one could reach out to or find, or, what are the different jobs that are there that maybe a teen could think about as an option or an opportunity to talk with?
So I would say that anyone who works in a school system, regardless of, popular opinion, or if a teacher, is known as a mean teacher, every single person is there because they believe in children. Every single person shows up to a job in a school because they believe in helping to educate. I think for me, some of the most amazing conversations that are had are by the people who you wouldn't necessarily say, go and have a conversation with. The folks who are working in the lunchroom, the folks who are working on the custodial staff, the folks who might come in and be working as your patrol officers in the schools, the people who are in the classrooms, the aides, the teachers, the administrators. Your guidance counselor is a really key part of the development of everything within the school. And so a guidance counselor is certainly a safe person to go to. And students might find comfort in talking with a gym teacher or a music teacher, because that might be, there might be a child who just loves art. And so they find a deeper connection with an art teacher. And so, as a student, my hope is that you're going to be able to identify one or two people. I talk with students a lot about who are your five. And if something doesn't go well, think about ahead of time, because part of it is planning. So when something doesn't go right, if we've got a plan, if we've got some tools in our basket, we can pull from them. So thinking about the five people in your school who, if something happens, you would feel safe enough to say, I'm not doing okay, or this is what happened, I need some help, or I'm struggling today on X, Y, and Z, and I need some advice. And so thinking those things through, and for every child, it may be a little bit different. It might be a senior, if it's a freshman, who a kid looks up to because they're, in the choir or they're in the band, and someone is just getting their feet wet and joining. So it's really, there's multitudes of folks that can come to mind for our students. But if we can sort of remember, like, think of your five, and here's the thing, not every student's going to have five, and maybe some students have 10. So whatever number feels right, being able to identify ahead of time the safe folks who you can go to as students makes all the difference in the world in the moment when you need someone.
How would you address, just advise students to not even start with vaping because it's so addictive, or assistance in cessation of vaping?
So I think we have to meet students where they are. I think, if we go in and we are the expert and we say, here's what needs to happen, here's how it needs to happen, here's when it needs to happen, that can be a time when students will shut down. And so part of it is, there's a skill that we learn in the clinical world called motivational interviewing. And it really is about meeting students where they are. So using opening phrases like, can you help me understand? Or can you share with me a little bit more, when students are sharing with you why? What is the why behind what they're doing? And it might not be something that a student is going to be able to say right away, well, here's why. It might just be the thing to do. So they started doing it because that's where it is. And so I think we have to meet students where they are and talk. Our job is to educate and give some information. But part of, when I was the substance abuse liaison for the counseling center at Washington College, one of the things I would do with the college students is say, okay, how many times are you drinking in a week? And so here we'll use vaping. So how many hits of a vape are you using in a day? And maybe somebody says 15. And so instead of going from, you have to quit cold turkey, maybe what the strategy becomes is, okay, let's try 10. And let's see if we can get you down to 10. And then let's see if we can get you down to 5. let's go to 2 and then let's be done. But I think it's really about putting a plan in place that a student can be held accountable to, that a caregiver, a parent, or whoever is working with that child can live with, because, there may be some parents out there that say, Beth Ann, that's not going to work for me. My kid just needs to be done. But I think when whether it's social media, whether it's vaping, whether it is drinking, you put any sort of vice in front of someone, if we cold turkey it, we don't always teach the skills and strategies for moderation. And so we want to move towards that moderation to being done versus just a cold turkey strategy.
I like your part. Can you help me understand? That's really
that's a Brene Brown phrase from her Dare to Lead book. And it really is a phrase that does not put people on the defense. You could imagine if you're sitting with a student and saying, why are you doing this? Versus, can you help me understand what it is about vaping that continues to have you doing it? There's such an openness to the help me understand versus the defensiveness of the accusation of you're doing something wrong. And I think that's really another important component in these conversations. We have to leave the judgment out of those conversations as well. We have to give students the space to say, I did it wrong, or, we can't go in and say, you've done it wrong. Students have to learn on their own, and they have to sometimes come to their own conclusions as well, as we are leading them to, okay, this is acceptable and this is not. Students need boundaries and structure. If we've learned anything through COVID, boundaries and structure is what our young people need. And it's really what our adults need too. Let's be serious. We all need boundaries and structure. So it's something that really can make a difference. And as we're setting that boundary and structure, phrases like, help me understand why, because that's what we have to do anytime that we are moving people away from an addictive vice or anything that has supplemented self-care. We have to stay curious. We have to ask questions so that there is an understanding, so that we can really get to the root of it. It's like saying to somebody, just stop drinking. Well, if they're drinking because they have anxiety and nobody ever says, why are you drinking? Or what, help me understand why you're drinking more this week, and nobody explores the why behind it. All of these things that we have talked about today on the podcast, they are a vice that comes in to help mask and cover up a feeling. It all comes back to the feeling. So we have to uncover the why behind what is happening.
So as a wrap up, is there anything I haven't asked you, or any kind of piece of advice or observation that we're speaking specifically with teens?
No, I would say all of the advice that you and I have talked through tonight, while I may have been providing it for the parents, the same goes for you all as students. Stay curious, but ask questions and understand. And if you find yourself sitting there and thinking, wow, she's really talking about me. I'm the person who is really trying hard to fit in, and I'm trying to make sure that I keep these friendships. Take stock. Sometimes we have to weed out the garden, no different than we weed our garden in the summertime. Sometimes we find ourselves that relationships might not be healthy, and there might be unhealthy behaviors that are happening in a friend group that didn't look that way 6 months ago. And so stay curious about what fills you in a healthy way. Self-care is really important, and making sure that you're fulfilling yourself with friends and friend groups and activities that in the long run are not going to be something that's going to be causing harm, but that's really going to be growing you as individuals.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I was wondering if maybe there's, being still general, if there's like an example of, you could see the transformation of maybe a young person making a conscious choice to change a habit or a behavior, and what maybe kind of joy or even a stronger sense of self that they might get from that choice.
Yeah, I have a young person in my own life who is coming out of a pretty hard time with using vaping and alcohol, and is under the age of 17. And so it's someone who went the direction of trying to use a substance to fill a void, and has come into my life within the last year. And I've been watching the transformation. And, some of the things I would say to all of you out there is the moments that are missed when we are not our true selves, the moments that are missed when we are supplementing real joy with temporary joy. Those are the moments that this young man is now reflecting back on, not having a great memory of some of the most amazing nights because there was some sort of substance on board. And what he has reflected back for me time and again is that he feels like he is able to find genuine joy in a different way because he's getting to the root of what was causing him to lean towards substance, and now has the ability to understand a little bit more about how he works, how anxiety shows up, and the tools and skills that he has to manage the stress and anxiety work in all facets, with family, with friends, in school. And there's been a different trajectory of happiness that has come because he has figured some of this out in very hard ways. Let me be clear, this was not an easy path, and this was 18 months of really struggling. But now is able to look back and say, like, that I didn't really, I wasn't finding true joy. I was finding temporary quick fixes versus really being able to say, I'm happy. I'm happy that I'm where I am, and maybe things aren't perfect and they're hard to work through, but I'm doing it now in a way that I can say I am authentic to me and what my body needs and how I need to be able to show up for my siblings and my parents and my friends.
Have you come across outside resources, like maybe some like text messaging advice or websites that you feel are really helpful and legit places that teens could go?
I you certainly, our office, there's many mental health agencies around the shore. My firm belief is we all do it better when we do it together. And so certainly For All Seasons is a resource. There's also great programs within all of our health departments across the counties that really dig into substance abuse and our intensive outpatient programs. SAMHSA.gov is a great website that has lots of resources. There are hotlines that are available. Hotlines are a really great way to be able to have a conversation with someone that you don't know, and you might just need a little piece of advice, or you might just need to check yourself. I think some of the greatest resources that are out there is that thing called your gut, because 9 times out of 10 our gut tells us what's right and what's wrong, and we know how our body is reacting. And so I also think that one of our best resources is our body, and we need to pay attention. When we're doing something that we know, if our mom or dad or our caregiver standing there would not say, that's great, that's lovely that you're doing that, we know our gut tells us. And so also don't forget to pay attention to your own body's reaction to what's happening.
I think that's a great way to end it. 'Cause back to yourself, in a sense, your gut. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.